part of the service. And poor Chris is on the tech desk and has millions of slides to deal with. And normally I get Martin to do that, but because he's joining in, poor Chris is lumbered with it. So we'll hope it goes all right. Before we start, I just want to say that we're not an expert on anything that we've got to say, really. We're just trying to share a few things that have struck us. We're going to use some quotes, which are probably generalisations, and you can probably find exceptions if you wanted to. So I'm just asking you to listen, and you may come to different conclusions to us. But I'm just hoping that there'll be something useful that you can start to think about. We've got a couple of themes running through the talk. We're going to be looking at work and rest, and also about making choices, what we decide to spend our time doing. Now, working is clearly very important, and there are a number of Bible verses that tell us this. First of all, in Proverbs, it says,
"All hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty."
And then into the New Testament from Thessalonians,
"For even when we were with you, we gave you this rule: the one who is unwilling to work shall not eat."
And my personal favourite, back in Proverbs,
"I went past the field of a sluggard," great word, "past the vineyard of someone who has no sense. Thorns had come up everywhere, the ground was covered with weeds, and the stone wall was in ruins. I applied my heart to what I observed, and learned a lesson from what I saw. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man."
That last one, Chris, can you just go back to the first bit of it? The thorns come up everywhere, the ground covered in weeds. It really reminds me of when we had an allotment, and even sharing it with our friends, that was still what our allotment looked like. We just did not have enough time or enough commitment to give it the work that it needed. And so, yes, hats off to people like John and Cecile who have a productive allotment going all the time. Now, these words from Thessalonians, the New Testament ones, sound like particularly harsh words. You shall not eat if you are unwilling to work. And if we take verses like that out of context and in isolation, they are really quite harsh. But we need to have a more sophisticated understanding of the Bible if we're going to be able to seriously apply what it has to say to our daily lives. We could spend a lot of time arguing about what verses mean. When I started to look at work and rest online, there were pages and pages and pages of people arguing about, it means this, it means that, it means the other. What does work mean? Is it paid work? Is bringing up children work? How judgmental are you being by saying these things? It just went on, and you can fling Bible verses backwards and forwards on most subjects. So sometimes that's how we try and understand the truth of the Bible, by arguing and debating. But I came across a quote by Philip Yancey, who said, no one was ever converted to Christianity because they lost the argument. Which is a good way to think about it.
What if instead of the arguing backwards and forwards, trying to prove ourselves right, there might be a better way that we could get to grips with the Bible? Something that looks less like a political debate.
Perhaps engaging with the others on theology, the study of God, should be more like friends sitting around a campfire, sharing our stories, sharing what's been helpful to us, sharing our problems, our insights, our struggles, our failures. I've spent a lot of lengthy nights with friends and a bottle or two of wine and lots of chocolates, listening to them, talking to them, sharing things I've learnt, telling them what I admire about them. And we gain a greater understanding of each other. We increase in our love for each other. We gain in our knowledge. I sometimes wonder if we did this with our reading of the Bible and our lives as Christians, if it might be more effective. If it was less about wanting to be proved right and more about understanding each other.
I think the campfire analogy can help us understand some of the complexities and even some of the apparent contradictions if we just take a sort of straight reading of the Bible. I've often heard people say that the Bible is our rule book or our manual. For me, neither of these fully does it justice. I've started to think of it more like a giant campfire conversation about God and his relationship with us. A myriad voices in the Bible joining in the conversation with a unique contribution, a unique perspective, and all of that helps us make more sense of life. And I think beyond that, the conversation's one that's ongoing. New situations and different cultures mean that we need to keep telling our stories, relating our experience, listening to others, and finding new things that help us understand that great historic conversation and help us to keep putting the conversation from the Bible in context and how that works with the way life works now.
So last week, Tina was talking about stories and conversations that people were having. And we heard from a few people about how conversations had helped them to become Christians. But I think it's quite important, as well as telling those stories, we also tell our ongoing stories. You know, how our lives ongoing are impacted by God, not just how we first found God, and how we relate the Bible to our everyday lives. I've really enjoyed reading an author called Brian McLaren, and one of the interesting things he says is that our theology is only useful if it informs our theopraxy. And what that means is our theology, our study of God, is useful if it informs our theopraxy, our outworking, our practice of God. There's no point in learning the Bible inside out in isolation. It has to be applied to our lives and our relationships and how we live. So we thought we'd share some of our stories with you. A part of this thing about the theology and the theopraxy comes from the Bible itself as well, because you can look at James and it says in there, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves, but do what it says. Yeah? Working that out is the difficulty, isn't it? But that's fine.
I think some of these Bible passages on work that we've read earlier, and many besides, often get used to underpin what's often called the Protestant work ethic. Very focused on hard work, and then this gets kind of rolled in with our cultural expectations that being successful means working all hours, and the harder you work, the more successful you are. Being busy, we can end up just rushing madly from busy thing to busy thing. We found in our lives this was the case a few years ago. We needed to make to find a way to make life work, because being busy all of the time just wasn't working.
We managed to rack up about 6 part-time jobs between us, as well as home educating our 3 children, doing things with the home ed charity that we're involved in locally, doing things at church, not to mention just the general family life that everybody deals with, and political campaigning that we were also involved with at the time. Things were really building up, and we just had a life where we couldn't cope. We just were not coping. We cut back on a few things, knocking out the things that we could easily knock out, but we were still really overwhelmed with busy things, all of which were actually important to us. In the midst of this, we had a lovely Saturday evening at a friend's beach hut by Thorness Bay. It is my favourite place in the whole world. It just always brings me a sense of peace. We slept over in the beach hut and woke up on Sunday morning to the fantastic view out over the fields and the sea. And I just experienced, in the midst of all that busyness and chaos, a sense of peace and tranquility. It had a really profound effect on me. I can, just sense it now talking about it. Why didn't I have more mornings like that? Why were we always rushing about all day Sunday instead of relaxing and feeling peaceful like we did that morning? Why didn't we have enough time to enjoy each other's company? We didn't really make any changes though. And then shortly afterwards I read an article by an author called Michelle Guinness, a Christian Jew, and she was writing about having a sabbatical with her husband, who's a Church of England minister, in France. They were going to do up a house during this sabbatical, but they decided they would have a day off on a Sunday from the DIY, and they would go out cycling, having a leisurely meal together. They wouldn't work on the Sunday. Now, I know it's not rocket science, but suddenly it struck me that this was what we needed. We needed that sense of rest, a day a week for resting, for playing, for fun, for worshipping God, not for work. A day to be different to all the rest. You would think that as a Christian of long standing, with a heritage in the Christian church of the Sabbath day, I would have tweaked a bit earlier. Anyway, I pointed Martin in the direction of the article and he agreed with me. In Exodus it says,
"Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labour and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy.
So the Lord, who has infinite strength and could, I'm sure, carry on creating forever, had a rest on the 7th day, I think, to model for us that we need times of rest as well as work. He worked for the 6 days and then he had a day of rest. So how are we going to keep our Sundays different? They needed to be fun. I had memories of friends who told me that in their little Welsh churches that they went to, they weren't allowed to play with any toys on a Sunday except for their Noah's Ark. And I didn't want my Sunday to be like that. No offence there, Lyndon. This was in the past. So we wanted to make it a fun day, a day that was the best day of the week, not a day when they were restricted. And when the kids were little, we'd actually done this. We'd had Gisbit Day. That was our biscuit day. We had biscuits for breakfast, but Rebecca couldn't say biscuit at the time, so it was Gisbit Day for us. Now, of course, we come here and we don't need to have biscuits before we come to church because we've got our lovely coffee. People are very generous with bringing cakes and biscuits and things. So we have a good start from that perspective to our Sundays. But what else were we going to do? We were going to have a proper day off. We don't do any work on a Sunday, no matter how busy we get. We don't go shopping. We don't use the computer, except to watch TV together. We do the things that we feel like doing, and we do things together. And most importantly, I would say, is that we have a long, leisurely meal together. And normally a bottle of wine as well. We do, however, remember that the Sabbath was made for the needs of the people, not the people made for the requirements of the Sabbath. So we keep this as a general principle, not a hard and fast rule. So today, with the lovely weather, we're going to have a barbecue. We haven't got quite everything, so we will nip to the shop and buy something to put on the barbecue. So, I'm not being too holier than thou. So it's a general principle for us. We relax, we enjoy it. And the thing we have found is actually, the busier we are, the more we're tempted to use that day for other things, the more important it is for us to have that day off. To have a day where we spend resting, relaxing with our friends, or our family, and just not working. It's so important, especially we work in a self-employed capacity. That could go on forever. You would never have a break. And I'm sure it's the same with people who are doing up a house or have cars that need fixing, or there's so much that we all need to do. But having the day of rest is so important in the midst of busyness. Jesus had a few things to say about that as well.
The apostles gathered round Jesus and reported to him all they'd done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they didn't even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourself to a quiet place and get some rest."
And in Luke as well it says,
Soon a large crowd of people had gathered to listen and be healed of their ailments. As often as possible, Jesus withdrew to out-of-the-way places for prayer.
As often as possible, Jesus withdrew to out-of-the-way places for prayer. Yeah, he withdrew to spend time by himself and with God. We try and withdraw from the hustle bustle of everyday life as well by sitting in the garden on a sunny afternoon and drinking a cup of tea. Now, I have to go back 2 years to find the photos because last year was so wet that we didn't have so much chance to do that. But we do. We try and sit at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon with a cup of tea and have a proper break. And then we can go back on with the busy things we're doing, but we do try and have a rest in the middle of a busy day where we possibly can. I'm not trying to say that you should do these things. I'm just trying to share these experiences of what has been helpful to us. The American author Eric Hoffer said, "The feeling of being hurried is not usually the result of living a full life and having no time. It is, on the contrary, born of a vague fear that we're wasting our time. When we do not do the one thing we ought to do, we have no time for anything else. We're the busiest people in the world. The converse is also true. When we do the one thing we ought to do, we have time for everything." I think for me, this is key. I need to decide which are the important things to do. What are the important things for me and for our family? I'm very fond of saying to everyone that there is a never-ending stream of good things that you can do, good and worthy and helpful things that you can do, but not all of them are the right things for you. We could fill our lives with a never-ending stream of helpful things. You have to decide what is the things that are important. So if I decide the things that are important to me, I can then give them the time that they deserve and not allow myself to get overtaken by other things, which might also be good. But we'll squeeze out the things that I've decided are the most important. For example, all our children go out to various clubs on a Thursday night, so we've dedicated Thursday nights as our date night. We've opted to make our marriage a priority, and one way for us to do this is taking advantage of this situation. It might only be this year that it works, but for now, it works. This date night doesn't cost us anything, which is important to us because we haven't got much spare money. Now, there are all sorts of things that come up that we could do on a Thursday night, that we might want to do. There's a 3-week art class that I would like to do coming up. There are things we'd like to contribute to midweek church. There are work nights out with colleagues. All of these things are good things to do, good and positive, but they interfere with what for us is currently the most important thing for us on a Thursday night. We're just going to show a quick video clip, a trailer to a Numa video.
Do you find yourself saying on a regular basis, I'm just so busy, or we have so much going on? Why? I mean, if we were to look at your calendar, all the things you're involved with, where you're going, what you're doing, and we were to ask the question, why? Being busy is a drug that a lot of people are addicted to. You have a hard time saying no? Or perhaps there's a better question. What is it that you have said yes to? Because you can't say no until you've said yes to something else.
I have the whole video if somebody wants to borrow it. You can ask me. One of the things we've decided to say yes to is our commitment to this church. That's part of our yes to God, and it's part of the outworking of how we do that. We've decided to make Church on the Roundabout a yes in our lives. Now, this church has just had a rest week. For some of you who maybe just come on a Sunday morning, that won't have meant much to you. But for those of you who are here, pulling out the chairs, getting things organised, opening and closing the doors, it will have been a well-deserved rest. Yeah, that's why Tony and Sally are not here. They're having a rest week too. So last week was a rest week. In a couple of weeks' time, we've got the festival. And that will be a work time. This is the balance. Yeah? We need to have times of rest and times of work. Now I'm sure that next week Tony will go into detail about it. But for those of you who don't know, I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about the things we do over the festival. We fling open our doors and offer love and acceptance to the people who come by. We show God's love by offering them free teas and coffees, biscuits, and Paul's always well away with his hot dogs as well. We let them charge up their phone. That's been a huge blessing to people. And if they're really lucky, just keep it quiet, but they might get a chance to use the toilets, only if they're very lucky this year. It's a great way to show God's love. The church is often seen in a negative way, and it can be such a positive side to Christianity, just giving out and asking for nothing back in return. Yeah, a practical demonstration of God's love. And we have the most amazing conversations with people as we go. It takes a lot of people to help out, and it can get really busy and exhausting, even just for a weekend. And we need to make sure that we manage to get some rest even within that. So our family personally, well, I don't know actually about the kids, but me and Martin personally, will not do anything else much over that weekend. We'll decide that we'll commit our work time to doing stuff here, and then we'll be able to just chill out the rest of the time. So we won't have too much going on. There won't be gourmet meals in my house that weekend. The other way we can get some rest over the weekend is to spread the load and work together. The old adage stands up here, many hands make light work. If we work together, we'll spread the load. You might decide that you want to give up your weekend as well. or a day, or half a day, or even half an hour. You might want to come and make some coffees, chat to festival goers. You might decide that for you, that is also a yes. Next week, Tony will go into detail, I'm sure, about how you can say yes. But whether we say yes to the festival outreach or not, I think the key thing for me and maybe for you is finding balance in our lives and making our decisions, working out our priorities and then living the lives we aim to lead, rather than ones that just kind of happen to you. Now, I'm talking to myself as much as you here, because the last couple of months for us, Martin's had 2 or 3 extra pieces of work to fit in. Ruth's been doing her GCSEs. We've had to finish off our camper van so we can go on holiday. Jonathan seems to have had loads of extracurricular type activities to do. And Rebecca's had a myriad of extra weekends away that she's volunteered at. So I'm going to try and anchor all that, take up the slack, and just keep it all together. And to be honest, it hasn't really been working, and I've been feeling really stressed. My priorities have got lost. And next week, when we have got some planned time off, I'm going to look back over what I've said this morning and make sure that I've got my priorities in order and what I want to spend my time doing. There'll always be different times in our lives, times when we're busy and times when we need and should rest. And this sort of seasonality in our lives is indicated in Ecclesiastes. Martin's going to read this well-known passage to us now, and then we're going to move on into communion.
Everything has its time. Everything on earth has its own time and its own season. There's a time for birth and death, planting and reaping, for killing and healing, destroying and building, for crying and laughing, weeping and dancing, for throwing stones and gathering stones, embracing and parting. There's a time for finding and losing, keeping and giving, for tearing and sowing, listening and speaking. There is also a time for love and hate, for war and peace.
Jesus ate with people a lot. It seemed to be where a lot of his work was done in changing individuals. It seemed like he found the cause of heaven at work in family meals. I'm going to ask Rebecca and Martin to read a couple of stories of Jesus eating with people, giving us a chance to reflect on these meal stories, and then I'll invite you at the end, if you feel comfortable, to share in the bread and wine with us. The bread and wine will be brought round to you. Ryan and Paul, could you do that? And you'll be free to take it in your own time. If you don't want to take it, that's fine, just let it pass you by. But first, listen and hear these stories, and think about how your own story might also be part of God's story.
Once I'd climbed down the tree, after Jesus invited himself for lunch, at my house, the tax collector, I found I wasn't that hungry. Not for food anyway. I was hungry for change, my own change. And watching him enjoy lunch and hearing him talk through mouthfuls as he opened up the way of faith, I had had my fill. I chose to change. I thought it would have happened in the synagogue as I was preached at by one of those powerful preachers. But it was round my own meal table, over Tuesday afternoon lunch and plain breaking of bread. I was convinced and convicted. I was hungry for this new life Jesus offered, and I have lived on the bread of life ever since.